Hi, everybody. We're doing this Facebook Live today on GnuPharma's Facebook page. So what we're going to do is we're really going to, I talk about this a lot. I talk about it in a lot of different ways, but we're going to walk through the GnuPharma model of human function. So really what we have at GnuPharma at the highest level is we have a theory, if you will, or a model of human function under something called the endocannabinoid system. So we're going to dive into that deeply today. So here we go. First of all, again, I'm going to say endocannabinoid a lot. Most of you guys know that the endocannabinoid system really doesn't have anything to do with cannabis. But what I want you to do is not get triggered, because this system, we have lots of systems in our body. We have an endorphin system. It doesn't have anything to do with, morphine, right? Other than it was used to discover it. We have a norepinephrine system. It doesn't really have anything to do with adrenaline other than, it was used to discover it, right? So we have these different systems in our body that are generally named after the things that were used to discover that system. So in a similar way, the endocannabinoid system has been named after cannabis. But it's a lot more than cannabis, so don't let yourself get triggered. We're talking about an internal system. Again, we'll talk about how cannabis influences it later, but let's talk about this internal system. Don't get triggered, because it's kind of almost like a distraction, right? It keeps you from understanding about this system. So don't let that happen. You need to know about this. It's very important. Okay. So what is the promise of the endocannabinoid system? So once you begin to understand this system and kind of how it works, and once you understand really how we can manipulate this system, oh my gosh, are you going to be just stunned and amazed? Because basically right now here in 2020, we're all driving a hoopty. We're driving the most beat up, horribly maintained vehicle that you could possibly imagine. And it's through no fault of our own. We just don't understand. We don't understand. But the situation that all of our bodies are in right now, you could think of as we're driving a hoopty, right? So we're driving a hoopty. We're falling apart everywhere, everywhere. Our society is breaking in every single possible way a human can break, right? Is this getting better? No, it's getting worse. We're all driving hoopties because we don't understand about this endocannabinoid system. I don't know how long it's going to take for us to understand, but we can speculate. Let's say 2021. Let's hope. No, it won't be that quick, but somewhere in the very near future, we're going to understand this, and we're going to upgrade our vehicles. We're not going to be viewed as broken anymore. If we have a disease, we're going to be viewed as malnourished. Okay? That's important. All right, so let's kind of dive into this a little bit more deeply, and let's talk a little bit about, let's say, old thinking versus new thinking, okay? So old thinking, how do our bodies work? How do our bodies function? Well, I was taught, I'm kind of old, but I was taught a long time ago that our bodies regulate and function through something called hormones. And so when our body wants to make a change inside of it, it uses our hormone system to do that. Okay, on the surface, I'll buy that. I certainly know that hormones, cause us to make changes, but is that the whole picture? No, that's not the whole picture. Far from. Again, certainly hormones are involved in the regulatory process in our body. We would all agree with that. But there's some real problematic things with thinking that hormones manage all of our body functions. Like, what manages the hormones? That's an important one. Where's the intelligence in the system? So if it's all hormonal, how does that work? Where's that intelligence? Our pituitary gland? It's not smart, it's a gland. So how does that work, right? So there's some real problems if you look at kind of the old model, if you will, of science or human function about how we regulate our body. And the biggest, frankly, problem with this is that the immune system is completely left out of the old model, right? How do hormones regulate our immune? They've got nothing, zero, really, to do with our immune response. All right, so kind of a funny slide. Again, if it was up to hormones, I mean, we probably wouldn't be in the best state in the world and we'd be all over the place. I mean, we use kind of hormones for excuses as to when our bodies are dysregulated, right? So this is kind of a funny slide, but haha. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the endocannabinoid system. Why don't you know about it? This is important. The reasons why you don't know about it. Well, part of why you don't know about it is it was just discovered in 1994. Really, it's kind of, there's a lot of things that led up to its discovery, but it was really just discovered, or the first main ligand, your internal guy that runs this system, was just discovered in 1994. So after that, what's happened is exactly what I cautioned you guys against in the beginning of this video. People have gotten triggered. They've associated the endocannabinoid system with cannabis. They've assumed that the only way to study this system is with cannabis, and that's not true. And we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. There's lots of things that will affect the endocannabinoid system. And again, this system is an internal system inside of us that really doesn't have anything to do with cannabis at all. At all. But wrongly, researchers have assumed that they needed this tool to study the system, and that's not the case. So that's part of the reason why you don't know about it. Really, the second part of the reason is it's just not taught yet. So because it's outside of the mainstream, so to speak, and kind of non-linear, it's not taught in any major universities. In fact, it was only taught at University of Maryland as a master's program last year. So the summer of 2019 is the first time that the endocannabinoid system, or medical marijuana, was taught at a master's level. So your physician doesn't know anything about the endocannabinoid system. Your vet doesn't know anything about the endocannabinoid system because your dog has one. Your dentist doesn't know about it. Your nutritionist, sadly, doesn't know about this system. But again, there's enough information out there where you can learn about it. And I'm certainly going to give you a lot of information about it where you can substantiate what I'm saying, okay? But the reason your doc doesn't know about it is just not taught yet. So he hasn't been taught yet, and he hasn't really had any impetus to go understand this system on his own. Generally, some physicians do. So again, how do we work? How do we manage? How do we regulate our body's functions? And how do we work as humans, right? Well, this endocannabinoid system is looking to be darn important. So one of the very early research sort of summations, I would say, about the endocannabinoid system is that it's looking to be a regulator of many, many different systems in our body. Now, GnuPharma would postulate, and GnuPharma did postulate a long time ago before this study, that it was your master regulatory system, that it maintained and ran really and was involved with all regulatory aspects of your body. But that certainly is looking to be the case, and that's now being very, nicely supported with research that this thing is your master regulatory system. And we'll talk in more detail, obviously, about that and how does that work. So let's dive in. Let's really get in here. So if you don't remember anything else about this particular talk, and again, if you've heard me talk before, I always talk about 3 major points on the endocannabinoid system. So if you don't remember anything else, remember these 3 points. So point 1 about it is it's very old. So we developed it in something called a C-squirt. So you can think about it this way. Before we developed legs, we had an endocannabinoid system. Before we developed lungs, we had an endocannabinoid system. Before we walked out of the ocean, we had an endocannabinoid system. Before we developed gills, we had an endocannabinoid system. Before we were able to be mobile, like with a fin or tail, we developed an endocannabinoid system. We developed it in something called a C-squirt, where we were a mouth, a stomach, a heart, an endocannabinoid system, and an exoskeleton, and that's pretty much it. From that little guy is where we diverged from insects. So insects went one way, everything else on the planet went the other. We share the endocannabinoid system with most life on the planet. If you have a bird, it has an endocannabinoid system. If you have a fish, it has an endocannabinoid system. All mammals have an endocannabinoid system. Most life on the planet has an endocannabinoid system. Again, and it may or may not be the master regulatory system in all of those things, but we're just kind of talking about humans right now. So point one about it, very old, very ancient, very common, should tell us all, very important, right? Okay, point two about it is it's looking to be, as I mentioned, our master regulatory system. Well, what does this mean? It means that it's involved with every regulatory process in our body. Well, again, what does that look like? I mean, that's a warm and fuzzy, giant, huge scientific statement, right? So what does that kind of look like as an analogy? Well, what that looks like is we work very much like our car, okay? So we understand in our vehicle that our vehicle has a computer, and that computer is always looking at all of these major systems in our vehicle. It's looking at, you know, how much gas we have. It's looking at how much oil we have. It's looking at our piston pressure. It's looking at how much air we have in our tires, how much windshield wiper we have in our windshield wiper reserve. It's looking at every system it needs to look at to try to balance that vehicle to perfect function, perfect balance, perfect homeostasis, right? So guess what? We work in exactly the same way. So again, and it's looking like our hypothalamus hippocampus is the computer in our vehicle. In a similar way, we have major systems. We have a feeding and craving system. It's how we take in nutrients, how we get hungry, how we nutrify, if you will, our body, and how we eliminate things. So that whole feeding and craving system, again, is a big system in our body. Is it managed by the endocannabinoid system? Yes, absolutely. How we think, how our minds work, that is a big system in the endocannabinoid system. Is that managed? And it is managed by the endocannabinoid system, but that's a big management system. Again, our immune system, how do we respond to COVID-19 and viruses, right? That is a system that is completely managed and driven by the endocannabinoid system, okay? All right, so let's use some logic here, all right? So we really understand that in our car has to have resources in order to work these systems. So in order to run our windshield wipers, we have to have windshield wiper fluid. In order to work how our engine is lubricated, you know, we have to have valves and we have to have oil. In order to move, we have to have gas. In order to roll the tires, we got to have air in the tires, right? So we understand that our vehicles need these resources, and without certain resources, our vehicles will break. We won't get very far. But we understand that about our cars. So I want you to really take that same idea and let's come over here and talk about it in our bodies. So again, if we don't have resources to run major systems in our bodies, what happens? Bad things happen. Would we need resources for our immune system? Absolutely. Would we need resources for cognition, for our energy, for our regulatory? We need resources for every single system in our body. We're a little bit more complicated than our vehicle, right? So we need resources for all of these major systems. So let's go back to the first slide. Everyone kind of, you know, again, we're going to drill into this a little more. I'm going to ask you this question again. But right now, according to the endocannabinoid system, we're driving a hoopty. We don't understand the resources that we need to fuel our vehicle. We are not even beginning to understand the resources that we need to fuel our vehicle. So how are we going to get to this model of the future, if you will? We have to understand these resources. We have to understand how this system works better, or we'll continue to drive our hoopties. Okay, so I'm going to talk about dopamine and serotonin because people understand dopamine and serotonin. Oh, great. I've got my, my thing here. So perfect. So people understand dopamine and serotonin. They understand this system. So if you'll look at my slide back here, you'll see the endocannabinoid system. Again, it's your top umbrella. It's your master regulator. It regulates everything about you. Right under that, another major system in your body is called your central nervous system, okay? And your central nervous system really is involved with a lot of regulatory aspects. So the endocannabinoid regulates the central nervous system, and the central nervous system regulates a lot of subsystems, including dopamine and serotonin. So without getting too complicated, dopamine and serotonin are what we need to run our cognition and our happy sauce. Without dopamine and serotonin, well, you can see on this slide, a dopamine deficiency may be related to Parkinson's. And again, it's related to how we run our mind and our cognition. You can also see on this slide a serotonin deficiency would have to do with our mood, kind of in energy levels. If we're depressed, if we're anxious, all these things. So how we regulate dopamine and serotonin, extremely important to how we feel and how we regulate our minds. What happens? Well, first of all, here's a question. Where do we get dopamine and serotonin from? Because again, it's not like we're born with a giant bucket of it and we die with a giant bucket of it. These are resources that we need to run our body. Where do they come from? Well, they come from foods that we eat. They have to come from foods that we eat. We're not magically getting injected with resources somehow. Our bodies are not magically able to, develop these. Our bodies are pretty magical. We make all of these resources from things that we eat, but without the things that we eat, we can't make these resources. So again, let me use dopamine and serotonin to illustrate this point. So where do dopamine and serotonin come from? And again, satisfy yourself with the research, but dopamine and serotonin come from two, and this isn't that important, but L-tryptophan and L-tyrosine are the two molecules or amino acids that dopamine and serotonin come from. Now, that's not that important. So the important thing is, if I put you in a box and I said, no L-tryptophan and no L-tyrosine for you, not going to give you any, it's a short amount of time before you're a depressed Parkinson's patient, because you can't build dopamine and serotonin. And as you have events, as your body's working regulatory events, it's depleting your dopamine and serotonin. And if you can't build anymore, whoop, you crash and burn and you're a depressed Parkinson's patient. Very important concept, okay? We cannot build the chemical mediators that we need to run our bodies. First of all, if we don't understand what they are, but if we don't understand these principles, okay? So we have to understand these things that we're putting in our body, and we have to understand how they break down into these chemical mediators that we need to do functions to run our bodies, to not be a hoopty. Excuse me. Okay, so if nothing else, I want you to really remember these 3 points about the endocannabinoid system. So first of all, it's very old, very ancient, and very common, which should tell us all it's very important. Second of all, it's looking to be our master regulatory system. We work kind of like our vehicle. We have a computer, our hypothalamus hippocampus, and it uses the endocannabinoid system as its sensor array and mechanism of action to perform changes in our body, like in our car. Point 3 about the endocannabinoid system is it's resource driven. So without resources, this master regulatory can't make changes or can't complete actions or can't up and down regulate different things, and we break. We break, okay? So let's look at this in kind of a little bit different way. Let's assume that we're breaking. Let's assume that we don't understand our dopamine and serotonin situation as to the endocannabinoid system. Let's assume that we don't understand what our L-tryptophan and L-tyrosine is, because this is absolutely the case, but let's just make this assumption. Well, what would that look like? Well, we'd all be, or beginning to be, really dysregulated, right? So what does it look like if I dysregulate you in major systems? What if I dysregulated you in your immune system? 8 out of 10 of us will die of inflammation. That's an immune dysregulation. Do we do real good at fighting off new things like this COVID virus? No, that's an immune dysregulation. Again, we don't have the juice to fight off new things. Do we have cancers? Yeah. Leading physician complaint is, doc, I hurt. That's an immune break. So again, 8 out of 10 of us are dying of this. Is it happening? Yes. Is it real? Yes. Because we don't understand our L-tryptophan and L-tyrosine, and we're stuck in a box where we can't get our resources. What would happen if we were breaking in feeding and craving, how we take in nutrients, how we process things? IBS, Crohn's, diabetes, type 2 diabetes, every single autoimmune is related to gut disorders in our feeding and craving system. Are we breaking there? Yes. Are we breaking cognitively? Are we having trouble with mood? Are we having trouble with energy? Are we having trouble with, SSRI inhibitors and PTSD and anxiety and depression and all those things? Yes. And even more so, the incidence of obesity doubled, incidence of autism doubled, tripled, 100-fold, right? So we're breaking in all of these major systems because we just don't understand what we need to put in our bodies to fuel our bodies. It's that simple, folks. It's that simple. So again, I would ask you, think about diseases. Think about the diseases grandma has, or mom, or dad, or your kids, right? Are those diseases of dysregulation? If they are, then they are addressable in the endocannabinoid system. That's how prevalent and important this is, okay? It's everything. It is our everything system. As we understand our L-tryptophan and L-tyrosine, again, we will be able to better eat for this system or supplement for this system, and we won't suffer the way that we're suffering right now. So what is the promise of the endocannabinoid system? Again, I would argue strongly, right now, we're driving hoopties. We're driving hoopties because we only understand the bare minimum it takes us to get down the road. We don't understand the maintenance and the upkeep and the things that we really need to be doing on our bodies, again, and just by diet, okay? So just by better education and better nutrition, we can go from the hoopty state to the wonderful, beautiful vehicle of the future. And again, this is exactly what we need to do. So I would ask you guys, please help us get the word out about this model. I think, if you're out there and you're understanding what I'm saying, you will understand the significance and importance of it. So we all should be talking about this. And then we all should be talking about what we can do to affect this model. Again, so now I'm going to kind of go to the business point with you a little bit. And let's talk a little bit. Well, I'm not going to go there yet, so I'll go there here in a second. But again, let's talk about this system and can we affect this system? Because this is the most important thing. We can talk about this model and all this, but is there a way that we can cause change in the system? Is there a way that if something is dysregulated, we can get it to re-regulate? Yes, absolutely there is. And again, sometimes it's higher resources and sometimes it's lower level resources. But as you begin to understand what these resources are, it's pretty easy, frankly, to, fix things. So why do herbs and spices work as medicines? I mean, I think we all know the value of turmeric. I think we all know the value of things like beets or blueberries or, what we call superfoods. Why do they work? Come on, why do they work? They work because things in them like anthocyanins or numerous flavonoids have effect in your endocannabinoid system. Like L-tryptophan and L-tyrosine are precursors that are built into dopamine and serotonin. These flavonoids are used by your endocannabinoid system to do things. And so that's why any plant, why it has medicinal effects, are generally either directly or indirectly related to the endocannabinoid system. Cannabis is just kind of a plant that will span as an effector across this entire umbrella. And so that's why it's such an important effector. Because again, if I have proper knowledge here and you're dysregulated with cannabis, it's like a magic screwdriver. So I can get in and really adjust anything in this whole situation once I have proper information. So it's very important. And again, I'm just indicating what I just described to you in this slide, but cannabis runs a spectrum indica to sativa. Again, cannabis can affect the endocannabinoid system all across this entire umbrella, which very similarly relates to indica and sativa strains of cannabis. So that's kind of a nice thing. If you look at the cannabis strain continuum, it pretty well maps out to a continuum of influence in the endocannabinoid system. So do you want to learn more? You know, that's the question. Absolutely. If you want to learn more, let me tell you a little bit about what we do. So we educate at a company called the Master Regulatory System. So you can see the link there. Again, we do classes on the endocannabinoid system, and we'll be doing more and more and deeper classes. We'll have a part 2 of this kind of free, if you will, class on the endocannabinoid system. And I'll talk a little bit more about how modern science, or whatever, pharma kind of views things now. So if you look at PDR, CDC, WHO, current physician makeup and all that, how disease states are viewed there, and then potentially how disease states will be viewed in the future. So obesity is one that I go pretty deep into, and then also autism. We'll talk a lot about how this kind of looks with autism, or things like ADHD. ADHD and autism to me are kind of on the same spectrum. But anyway, we'll be doing a lot more education, a lot more of these videos. And the reason for that really is because of GnuPharma. Again, GnuPharma for a while, we've had this model and we've had patents around this model, but we never knew how our patents would issue. And so our patents have issued in the last couple of months. So we feel a lot more free about talking about our model, because we have a commercial fence, I would say, that where we can boundary in anybody who tries to get in our model. So that's important. Now at GnuPharma, if you want to talk to us about formulation, again, we will license a formulation to you if you're wanting a very specific formulation. If you want us to help, again, with a white labeling something that we have, again, that's a little less expensive. There's a lot of different things that we can help you with at GnuPharma. But we try to take our science and technology and really translate that into some way to help another human or another animal or another mammal, right? So we want to take what we know and we want to build products with it that help, right? Helpful products. So if you're in that situation, we'd love to help you. We have, again, not a lot of people understand what we're doing. And certainly when we started all this in 2014, no one understood what we were doing. So we have had to build a brand, so to speak, based on our technology, but we have some really cool things in that brand. And so that brand is TrueMedics. And again, you can find us on the web at www.truemedics.com. We've just released a kids line in that brand, and we have a product that is targeted at the ADHD, ASD spectrum. And there's a video out on that product that goes into a little bit more detail about kind of what we're trying to accomplish there and why we think it's beneficial. So anyway, we've got a lot going on. We'd love to talk to you. We'd love to discuss with you. If you have questions, leave them under the thread. If you want a copy of this presentation, I'd be happy to send you one. Just leave your email under the thread if you want to do that. Or if you want to send an email to info@GnuPharma.com and just say you watched it online and you'd love to get a copy of the presentation, we will make that available to you. And we'll do another one of these in, I think, next week. We'll probably do the part 2 of this, and we'll do that deep dive where we're looking at PDR versus, I call it Master Regulatory System eyes versus PDR eyes. But we'll go down into some conditions and dive a little bit deep. So thank you guys. I've enjoyed talking to you today, and we will see you later after I stop the old screen share here. And it's always a little awkward ending a Zoom meeting. Anyway, see you guys later. Enjoy.